Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein.
Hello.
Hey, Dave, how you doing today?
Well, I'm about 7 chapters into the AI textbook. There's only another 800 pages to go.
That's all, huh?
Yeah. Uh, and I'm learning a heck of a lot, and there's good things happening. But AI is the second half of the show.
Okay. Well, before we get to AI, you had some interesting news about psychedelics and magic mushrooms and other consciousness-altering drugs that are being used by lots of folks in Silicon Valley. What's going on with that?
Well, the Wall Street Journal reported that Elon Musk is taking ketamine for his depression. Uh, Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google, is enjoying magic mushrooms, psilocybin. And Founders Fund executives, which are investing in some of the psychedelics, have thrown parties.
Dave, I'm,
And
I'm a little behind the curve. What is ketamine about? What is that drug?
ketamine is Special K.
Okay.
People know it as a club drug. It's a legitimate anesthetic, which means that any doctor can prescribe it, even if all of this is off label. And the data, as I brought to the show, I think a few weeks ago, is surprisingly good. It is working quite well against depression and safely if you take it in a controlled setting, because of course, as we know, bad trips happen. So you have to control the set and the setting to do it
Hmm.
right. Timothy really taught us 50 years ago. Uh, a lot of Silicon Valley or executives who have all the money to do whatever they feel like are getting stoned on dope, of course. That's legal in California, and Elon Musk smokes some during a video interview, but also everything else. Microdosing LSD is a fad at places like Google, who thinks it helps people, where people think it helps them be creative and focused.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I don't know what the microdosing, taking a hundredth of the usual dose does, but I can tell you the one time I did LSD, and the statute of limitations is long past on that.
Okay.
It really did focus me. And even afterwards, when I wasn't stoned and looking back on it, many of the things I thought while I was doing the acid, see about what was motivating me and what I was doing seemed absolutely correct. So in my case, the acid trip did focus me
Hmm.
and did help me see things, and not just the music.
Okay.
Uh, I I I studied how to make LSD when I was in eighth grade science. It was legal at the time, and
It
they
was
had a
legal to
minor.
make it back then, Dave?
Yeah, there was no law against it. This is a
Okay.
long time ago.
This is pre-Tim Leary.
No, this was during Tim Leary, and Tim Leary got people so angry is one of the reasons they started making laws against it.
Okay.
Uh, and I knew enough about what was involved in synthesizing something that you had to do in micrograms that I learned it's easy to go very wrong. I'm glad that the New York Post exposed that Brooklyn Tech they were making LSD in the science labs. My science teacher said, maybe we shouldn't do that. It was a good thing because I was in a small high school and we didn't have a very good
Hmm.
science lab.
Hmm.
I probably could have done a very good job at it.
Well, one
Uh,
of the things that I remember that folks reported on about LSD taking was just the unpredictability of it. And even though it heightened folks' sensitivity and insight, insight into what, sensitivity to what seemed to be kind of all over the place for different people, depending on who they are, who they were, personality, circumstances, etc. I'm wondering whether or not the microdose enables folks to focus the effects of the drug more.
A lot of people think so, but presumably there's a large placebo effect to rule out, and
Hmm.
nobody has done uh, blind comparative studies
Hmm.
against the placebo. But that's actually been a standard thing in the Silicon Valley culture. The Silicon Valley culture uh, actually, well, before there was a Silicon Valley, was often stoned out of its mind. John Markoff wrote a book about that, how many of the true pioneers of microcomputers and the like, starting with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, were acid heads.
Mm.
Steve, there was once upon a time, somebody asked Steve, what was the difference between he, who founded Apple, and Bill Gates, who founded Microsoft? And he said, Bill Gates' problem is he hasn't taken enough LSD.
Wow.
Is that true? It's become, they're not using LSD, they're using psilocybin and ketamine routinely in psychiatric practice and very heavily in research. It's a version of it, as ketamine. It's actually been approved by the FDA, I believe, and there's way more coming like that. It looks like it really makes a difference. In fact, I'm trying to find a study that gives me a chance to do it in a carefully controlled atmosphere because
Mm.
people used to have bad trips and not just some bad drugs. Well made LSD can just knock you for a number, I understand. And some people I know probably did too much to it. We had the expression of burned out acid,
Hmm.
and I knew one good friend, did great work usually, but sometimes he was just out of it.
Yeah. And of course, so many quote unquote bad trips where people just kind of went off the deep end as a result of their intake of the drug. You couldn't always control where the trip took you. That to me, that was always the very scary part of psychedelics, in that you couldn't control the journey. And maybe that's part of the excitement and the opportunity, but for me, that was also part of the fear.
Yeah, and I was even more scared because I actually knew how sensitive it was to being made wrong.
Hmm.
And alcoholism was a serious medical condition that bad acid could take you
Yeah.
to.
But that's interesting that, we have these Silicon Valley titans, if you will, leadership, not just the workers in the trenches, but the leadership apparently taking psychedelic drugs, and I guess they're saying it helps them. I mean, are we getting any testimonials from these folks, or is this just anecdotal information?
It's all anecdotal,
Hmm.
but among the anecdotes is Elon Musk saying that ketamine is really helping his depression.
Hmm.
There's two things I know that I'm certain enough to say on the radio. One is that, as an early Harvard study showed us, it's crucial to control the set and the setting because you're reacting very deeply to what you're going on when you're doing an acid trip or a similar psychedelic. Usually, the the Harvard study and much of the work being done today has a trained person with you throughout. And in the old days, you usually had Thorazine ready to take if it started going bad.
Hmm.
I haven't seen anybody doing that now, but it's probably a good idea to just have it available. On the other hand, it clearly is working quite well against depression. I've looked at the medical studies on ketamine. It works at least as well as standard antidepressants.
Hmm.
You can take it and it probably continues to work for a month or more. And a key thing, why they've been trying to rush it into production, is that if you start on something like Prozac, it usually takes weeks before you start feeling the effects. They don't really know why that is. They have lots of
Hmm.
theory. You can do ketamine, and it can bring your depression, suicidal depression, under some control almost instantly before they release you from the hospital the next morning, for example. Now, very, very careful. When I said control setting, a Harvard study, that was done by Timothy Leary and Dick Alpert, who were not long after fired despite having tenure at Harvard because some people thought the drugs were too dangerous and ruining Harvard's reputation. Back then, in the 50s and 60s, LSD was considered a wonder drug by many, many people. The conservative owners of Time magazine, Henry Lewis and Claire Booth Lewis, talked about it very publicly.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And Aldous Huxley wrote the book, The Doors of Perception, that is still inspiring people.
Hmm.
But the public got scared. The drugs were thoroughly outlawed. It didn't stop people from doing them. And what were they talking about when the Beatles did a song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds?
I can't imagine. How about LSD got a hold on me?
Okay, so what I'm reporting here on community technology is not that it's a good drug for you to just go and take. In fact, everything I know says it's not good to just go and take. You want to control it and usually have a guide there to make sure it goes well. But it has become a thing in Silicon Valley, really
Mhm.
big. And the story in this came out of the Wall Street Journal, of all places.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Now,
something I think we should keep our eye on, Dave. I mean, it certainly has come full circle since our early days in our early college days when we were just introduced to some of this psychedelic stuff, and it was certainly frowned upon by the establishment back then, and as you say, outlawed and taboo, even though it was used by many, many young folks, but in a totally different context today, where you have the elite technology folks, leadership, now taking it to enhance their performance. Kind of amazing evolution.
let's take that a little bit further because we both went to a fancy college. Well, there are a lot of drugs around in the fancy college we both went to.
Yes, there were absolutely,
And
absolutely, and
one,
we were there in the '60s. So I mean, I think that was across the board, fancy college or not fancy college. Certainly, cannabis was rampant, as were many other recreational drugs.
and one of the reasons I want to go there is one of the most dramatic evidence of the racism in American society. All the information available says that white people were at least as likely as black people to be doing drugs, up to and including heroin. And that makes sense. White people have more money and the drugs are expensive. What do you think the ratio of people arrested for drugs is in the United States?
Non-white to white ratio.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised if it was something on the order of 5 to 1.
it's closer to 10 to 1.
Wow.
Given that there's the same level of drug use, probably more in the white community,
Mm-hmm.
it says a lot about the priorities and the nature of the system we live
Yeah.
in, period.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, where is heroin legal?
I know it's legal in Great Britain. I don't know about it being legal anywhere over in the States.
It's legal in Great Britain when the doctor can prescribe it to you. Here in the US, if you're in extreme pain like cancer, they tend to give you morphine and Oxycontin. And
Mm-hmm.
in England, for many years, they used heroin, which was developed as a drug for pain, relief pain. But there's a few places uh, where looking at Uruguay, which said this is ridiculous and de facto legal. But of all unlikely places, the Iran legalized or decriminalized heroin a few years ago.
Did you say Iran?
I said Iran,
Wow.
where they were actually hanging people for drug use for many years. And eventually they realized that that didn't stop anything. And they went to a policy which has been advocated, for example, by the top medical experts in England, of saying, okay, we can't stop it, but we can reduce the harm. And they stopped hanging people. In fact, they basically stopped sending people to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Remember how many, when I was doing the reporting on AIDS, we're talking around 1986, we knew that the people who got AIDS were overwhelmingly gay or drug users. And of course, there was, well, as a doctor who I interviewed at that point said, well, some people say it's a pity that the hemophiliac kids got it from their blood transfusions. But nobody in power cares about drug users. And you know what most of them think about gays. And that was one of the reasons that ACT UP was there with the slogan, silence equals death. Because it was clear in 84, 85, 86 that we weren't doing enough research. And one of the reasons was people who were taking the drugs were not the favored classes.
We're not what?
Were not the favored classes.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of society. So I did a radio show, and I was talking about, I did about 8 radio shows because I had the medical information that was actually just getting published, sometimes even before it was getting published, about AIDS. And I'm very proud because I got some useful information to a lot of people at the time. So in one show I said, well, we play music in the show back and forth. That was the style. So I played 5 or 6 musicians. Well, Jerry Garcia, Stan Getz, John Lennon, and several other white musicians to show, no, it's not just Charlie Parker and Billie Holiday doing the drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison, OD, also white, which is a good reason. And since we're talking about drugs as though they're useful tools, and many psychiatrists, professors think so, it's worth remembering that they can go very far wrong and being very careful.
Yeah.
Now, let's get to something that we think about more often on this show. The privacy and the facial recognition and what's being done. Stu, you had some comments there.
Yeah, well, I saw a story that you had highlighted that talked about facial recognition that, of course, we all know has been primarily used by law enforcement and security, is now moving into grocery stores, pharmacies, and other private businesses. This is a story in the New York Times about it, presumably to catch shoplifters. Well, interestingly, the city of New York had public hearings about 2 months ago, and I went to the hearing. And the hearing was around 2 bills that the city council has pending around the regulation of facial recognition technology by commercial establishments in New York City. And there are a lot of folks, including folks that we've had on this show from STOP, the security technology oversight folks, who came on and testified about the invasion of privacy and the many problems that we have talked about over the weeks and months on this show about the accuracy of facial recognition technology, particularly as it relates to Black women, where there's a very high error rate, and Black-skinned folks in general, which the technology has a difficult time distinguishing the features thereof. But one of the things that surprised me somewhat, Dave, at the hearing, and they saved my testimony till last, and for whatever reason, I got on a panel with three other folks who are all representatives of retail businesses that were pro facial recognition technology. And what these guys are, they're all three men. One represented an association of retailers from around the state, I believe it was. Another was a bodega operator who had a bodega in Upper Manhattan. Anyway, what they pointed out, and this was something that maybe you and our listeners were aware of, but I was not, was that much of the shoplifting that's going on now is shoplifting by gangs. It's organized, commercially based activity. It's not hungry people out there looking for something to eat. It's probably poor people, but still looking for a way to make a living out there boosting goods in order to turn them over and sell them to whatever these commercial conglomerates, commercial entities are that are amassing and reselling this contraband. Yeah, Dave.
eBay is traditionally the most visible one and has massive amounts of stolen goods being sold routinely. They talk
Interesting.
about all the things they do to stop it, but it keeps going on.
Interesting. Yeah. So anyway, so that gave me another perspective. I'm still not at all comfortable with the privacy and the invasion and the inaccuracies of the technology. But I did kind of sympathize with the store owners who were expressing extreme frustration and at how to kind of mitigate this problem. They said that the shoplifters were brazen, and they would come to the store owner's face and say, what are you going to do, type of attitude. And that, by the time you called the cops, they were long gone. It was a petty crime. Cops were not interested in necessarily going after that or doing any investigation. And that they thought, this is the store owners and their representatives, that cameras, recording, and facial recognition technology could be a tool, is a tool that would help them ameliorate this problem. So, it's interesting to see it from the other side, not even law enforcement, but businesses that felt impacted and looked at facial recognition technology as a possible tool to help them survive, to help their business survive.
Well, facial recognition. Obviously, no one uses it more effectively and more often than the Chinese. Now, do you think here in the US, our facial recognition cameras can decide whether you're black or white?
You say, do they decide?
Can they decide?
Can they decide? Well, it sounds like they have a difficult problem with darker skinned folks. So I think their error rate increases. The darker your skin, I think the more likely there to be errors. And I'm thinking that, they designed the technology with white people. And, just like, when we were kids in school, the flesh colored crayons were pink. So there you go.
And, well, in China, they've taken it further. The facial recognition software in China can determine ethnicity, not just the color of your skin. In particular, it can determine whether you're Uyghur or Han Chinese.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And at least the companies claim it does it quite well and it's being used. Uyghurs are seriously discriminated against and assumed to be terrorists by many official bodies in China. And in fact, some of the Uyghurs who are involved in the resistance to the Chinese government have killed a few hundred people, maybe more than that. And that is how they are using facial recognition there.
That's astounding. Well, Dave, we got to take a brief break. This is, I want to talk some more about this after the break. I did not know about that. The Chinese, that they're able to discriminate with that kind of fine tuning in their facial recognition technology. So let's pick it back up. You're listening to Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break. Okay, we're back. Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Dave.
Stu, we just were listening to some music in the break. Which AI program wrote that music?
Well, I guess it was probably a YouTube video. Does that qualify as AI?
Absolutely not. And I suspect I think all the music we've played so far on this show has been composed by human beings. But the
Yes.
reason I ask the question that way is this week I've been looking at several programs, AI inspired, that definitely can compose music.
Hmm.
And some of it's getting quite good.
Wow. Compose music from scratch. I mean, you don't have to give it any outline or basic
No musical outline.
uh-huh.
Most of this is designed to give text outlines. So that Jenny's working on a video uh, about well, it's gonna be a live contest. So I went to one side and said, give me 45 seconds of music up to the announcement of a contest winner, very exciting and rhythmic. And I got it. And she may very well use it in professional work.
Mm-hmm.
Would a professional composer have something even more appropriate? Absolutely. But there was no budget for what she has. And that's where it's going.
So
Another
let me
way,
just get this straight, Dave. She was able to create some music just out of the blue with AI
I
and
created the music out of the blue, giving a prompt saying, give me some music that's exciting, rhythmic, and designed to lead up to the announcement of the winner on the show.
wow. Now, Dave, let me ask you this. We both know, I've learned a lot from you and your study of AI, that how it works is AI has fed a lot of stuff, a lot of information. Is AI in this instance, musical composition, are they spitting back other people's riffs, other people's melodies, other people's musical creations, and just combining them in a new way? I mean, is there some copyright liability? How does this work?
That's in court now.
Okay.
And there's a whole lot of artists and musicians who are very angry that their work, their music, their illustrations were among the several billion
Mm-hmm.
illustrations and music clips that were used to program the AI. And they want to be paid for
Uh-huh. Sure.
it. Now, how related is that? Well, the first thing is that unless you tell the software, I want a song in the style of Snoop Dogg,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get something that absolutely is an original creation. While you're thinking of it, what musician doesn't have in their mind the music of many other people
Sure.
that they've heard and listened to?
Sure.
So it's not an easy question. And in this case, when I'm calling for a generic moods piece, and you can get pieces for meditation, you can get a burbling brook, you can get African drums,
Mm-hmm.
which are not related to any particular example of that music. And if it had been done by a human being and it went to court, somebody claiming, oh, he copied me. No, it's so far away from the original that they'd never get anywhere in court. So the answers on that aren't very clear. What I'm bringing to the air is not whether it's right or wrong, because I don't know. But yes, it is working quite well. So another thing that it can do, a whole lot of people like to do karaoke.
Mm-hmm.
I get for a program that can strip the voice out of any music. It can it knows the frequencies that are typically a vocalist and can just strip it out and leave you all the instruments
Mm-hmm.
and make your own karaoke tracks. This is nothing compared to what's going to be soon. Some musicians are great. One of them uh, said, please take my music and riff on it using your AI. Make something new, please, and released it. But others are very angry about it. I also have been looking at the video creation, and that's much more disappointing. At this point, yeah, there's lots of software that can make a 4-second and even 2-minute video. The best I've seen are essentially equal in quality to a bad animator.
So this
That's
is
not great.
this animated video. What kind of video is this, Dave?
It can be
What?
animated or it can be photorealistic.
Mm-hmm.
Photorealistic isn't coming out that great. The animation is getting a little bit better, but frankly, the quality isn't there yet.
Mm-hmm.
But there's, 50,000 musicians, artists, uh, working and programmers working on improving it, and that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Nature of the stuff in AR is the more you throw at it, the more you use it and get the corrections on what
Yeah.
isn't right,
Yeah. The
the
better it
better.
gets. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But you wanted to get back to the question of privacy. You had some thoughts.
Yeah, you were before the break, we were talking about privacy and how it's migrating to commercial establishments like stores and bodegas and stuff like that to help with the shoplifting, presumably. At least that's the stated focus of many shop owners and their representatives. But you mentioned, Dave, that the Chinese have developed the AI technology over here in the States. From the stuff that I've been reading, there are massive problems with identifying folks with dark skin and with any kind of reliability. But you mentioned that the Chinese have developed AI technology, facial recognition technology, to the point where they can distinguish ethnic groups, one Asian ethnic group versus another Asian ethnic group. Tell us more about that. How does that, is it reliable? I mean, and
I'm
is it politically motivated? Where's it coming from?
I'm sure it's not reliable,
Mm-hmm.
but it's probably 90-95% and getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that's getting a lot of attention is, well, as we know, there's been a war, a revolutionary war, led by some Uyghurs, an ethnic group, Muslim in far west China, against the Chinese government and the Han Chinese. And the facial recognition software there says it can pick out a Uyghur. Now, it turns out that everything is intermixed. I'm considered Caucasian, and there's probably some Numidian background somewhere in there from Africa generations ago. You're considered African American, and what's the chance that you had some Caucasian blood a few generations back?
High, given the history of African Americans here in this country, and in particular, given what I know about my background, there's certainty of some European genetic influence, as well as Native American.
And the evidence is very strong. The geneticists have been there looking at how much mixing there is. And the geneticists are able to do all the DNA analysis and show that the mixing is so extreme, nothing could reliably tell people apart, short of doing a full genetic DNA analysis. And even that's not perfect.
Yeah, even that. How do you where do you draw the line? I mean, there's no such thing as a pure this or pure that.
And that's what the geneticists are saying, that race is a concept that's political and sociological.
Right.
They don't see it in the science.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure the same is true in China, where the Tibetans and the Uyghurs have been in some form of revolt for many years. This is something I didn't even know. The Uyghur state goes all the way back. It had been independent sometimes, it had been ruled by China sometimes. How long do you think the Uyghurs, well, I'm not pronouncing it quite right,
Yeah,
and
I'm
the
not
Han
even familiar with them. Say that again. Do you know how to spell that, Dave? This group?
Uigyar, but it's
Okay.
supposed that's an English transliteration.
Okay.
How far back do you think the two have been fighting with each other? Recently, for the last 20 years, there's been an open rebellion of some Uyghurs against the Chinese state.
Hmm.
How long do you think the Uyghurs and the Han Chinese have been fighting each other?
I don't really know, but I know a lot of these things go back hundreds of years.
1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading some Chinese history, and in fact, about 1,200 years ago, the Chinese emperor looked to the independent Uyghurs for troops and support in his battle against another Chinese force. 200 years later, the Han Chinese took over the Uyghur state, and ever since then, they've been at war, not continuously, but it was very big, for example, in the 18th century.
Mm-hmm.
This one is going all the way back, and I don't know what that proves, other than that I'm relatively well informed on China. And I
Yes, you
didn't
are.
know that. Well, I read the Chinese press and translation. You
Mm-hmm.
can't keep up with that. You can't keep up technology without reading the Chinese press. Uh, and I didn't know that until recently when I was reading a book about Chinese history. It's been 1,000 years they have been fighting each other. Now, that's not as long, for example, as the time the Christians have been attacking the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
It's back to shortly after the time of Christ.
That's more like 2,000 years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Crazy, crazy, crazy. I find it interesting, Dave, that 1,000 years of fighting, and that there has been more commingling and disintegration of the ethnic and cultural lines. But I guess that just speaks to the depth of the conflict.
how Neanderthal are you?
I don't know. I do have read some stuff that, all of us who think of ourselves as Homo sapiens have some Neanderthal genetic markers in us.
The number that I'm recalling is 1.5% to 4%.
Hmm.
They are able to take Neanderthal bones, extract something, probably blood or white blood cells, uh, and sometimes actually do full scale genetic testing on. So we
Hmm.
know what Neanderthal DNA looks like. And a fair amount of that shows up with Homo sapiens. Now, you asked me how you could tell the different races and so on. It's not going to be accurate, but there are some places where the Neanderthals were common, which I would guess would be Europe and into West Asia, and some places where they were less common,
Hmm.
which I would guess would be the Americas and probably South Asia. And by looking at the amount of Neanderthal DNA, you can make a fairly good, but not guaranteed guess of somebody's ethnic background. You also can do it on facial features directly. Again, it's not going to be accurate, it's open to abuse. And that's one of the reasons that many of us don't want to see all this facial recognition getting out in the public uncontrolled.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
While we're talking about this genetic testing and genomes, I wanted to do a segue just a bit to a story. Pardon me, a story about uh, biomarkers for breast cancer, and the fact that there's some discrimination in the medical industry of testing of Black women in particular, where they're not tested for their not giving the genetic test, so they don't know about the genetic markers that they may have, which then makes them not eligible or not able to participate in certain clinical trials that may help reduce or mitigate cancer. Did you see that story, Dave?
Yeah. Uh, the the progress in cancer, based on genetics, based on some new drugs like monoclonal antibodies, is starting to become remarkable. Your chances of surviving 5 years has gone from 50% to 80%.
Mm-hmm.
And with the latest treatments, it's probably even higher than that. Most cancers are caused by a mutation. And it turns out there's slews of possible mutations in all the different things that determine the growth or non-growth of cells that get affected by, which could result in cancer. Which mutation is it? Well, we know if it's mutation A, drug B almost always cures it. If it's mutation C, no, you have to use drug F,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. And that they look for routinely now in breast cancer in particular.
Mm-hmm. So what is the issue with Black women not being tested genetically, Dave, that excludes them from the trials?
It's not just from the trial. This is now in daily practice in oncology, some places. So if you're at a good doctor, a good hospital, they're just going to automatically test all your biomarkers to see which flavor of breast cancer do you have.
Mm-hmm.
And it often points to the treatment. The article or the letter to the Times pointed out that far fewer Black women with breast cancer are being tested, many of whom will not get the right treatment because of it. And we've known for a long time, that Black women are definitely more likely to die of breast cancer than white women. Now, what that says about our health system, you can draw your own conclusions on. But the
Mm-hmm.
data is very clear about what the effect is. Second medical story. We've been talking about the advances that have been happening in medicine because I've been reading them for the last 5, 10 years and dramatically in the last year or two. And we've talked about the many things that are now being cured with the new tools. And one of them is getting out there against hemophilia A.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about it is the first AI designed treatment.
AI design, Dave?
AI designed treatment
Wow.
to make it into stage 2 clinical testing.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like it works quite well. And with after a bigger test, which will take a couple of years, it may very well be on the market as a routine treatment. It's coming from a company, BioMarin. And I looked at the company. They have 37 candidate drugs, of which several are in first stage of clinical testing now. The same thing that can look through billions of text and find patterns in the text can look through hundreds of thousands or several million identified proteins and other body substances and figure out, oh, these seem to be related to hemophilia, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Now that can be done and is done, and that's how they know it. It's been done for many years with very fancy and important and expensive laboratory testing. It now becomes much easier to do that. They're looking at targets in everything from hemophilia to any cancer you can name. And it looks like the AI is able, just as it can come up with text, can often come up with the information about what is causing particular cancer.
Wow.
Now, we also know, we talked about it a few minutes ago, that you can use AI to make music and to make videos. And you can use it to design proteins.
Mm-hmm.
And the structure of proteins has been major field of medical research, or scientific research, at least since the 1950s. And it's still laborious to actually do some of the work. You need a graduate student spending 3 months to do it. AI now is able to figure out protein structures with pretty good accuracy. This is being done by Google's DeepMind in England, who have identified probable protein structures for 300,000 different proteins that have been identified by science, but very few of which had been the structure. And by looking at the structure of what's causing the cancer or the hemophilia, and looking at that, you can design a drug that fits lock and key into the receptor that they've identified. Everybody in the field thinks this is going to be breakthrough after breakthrough. Hasn't happened yet, but the news this week is that one of the hemophilia treatments designed by artificial intelligence is going into a second level clinical trial because the results in the first level were quite good.
Well, that is indeed exciting news, and good to hear something positive coming out of AI. But Dave, we're about out of time here. We've been chatting it up about AI and the medical industry, and there's so much going on.
So let me say something that's not about AI. They've just released a perfectly decent 4G feature phone in India. Reliance Jio has done it for $12 US. The service is costing, for a reasonable amount of connection, $1.50 a month.
Wow.
This country, it's very hard to find a service less than $35.
Yeah, and you're certainly not going to find a device for $12. That's crazy.
Yeah, but it works.
Okay, well, let's talk about that some more next week, Dave. We're out of time. We got to go. Thank you. This has been Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Just might learn something. Thanks so much. Good night.